are ready to begin our study of block 1. This is block 1. Let's see, things that you need to know. As far as putting it together to applique it in place, it follows the instructions in the overview video very closely. You'll see that your patterns for it tell you that your hole is at 2 1/4 in, 2 1/2 down, and remember that is from the outside, the 1/4 inch outside edge. It's 3 inches wide and 3 1/4 inches tall. You'll have your curtain, your lace will be the same size of the window, but you'll adjust it up. And your instructions for your window are here, and your instructions for your shutters. You'll also cut 2 green spaces, and they are not the same size. This one on the right, when you're going, wow, that one looks bigger, it looks bigger on purpose. 2 symmetrical would be crazy. And then you have the 2 terracotta pots down here. Don't forget when you're placing them that they'll go up 1/4 inch just so that their edge hits just right here. And the instructions for putting the lace on are pretty accurate. This little instruction right here is about cutting your medallions from cork. So for the record, I do not have any more of this cork. I sent it all to Midway Wool to cut. Well, I'm sure there's more of it, but they were cutting and putting kits together, so they have my whole roll of this. So it says cut a square, and I'm hoping that you can look at the picture and see where the square is, because if I remember on that one, there's a bigger square and a smaller square, and when I cut it bigger, it just didn't look right. But you can cut your cork just exactly on the line. Cork is not going to fray, so you don't have to worry about it fraying. You don't have to needle turn. But this is where the tricky part comes in. You do not pin cork. I don't recommend you pin cork. I mean, it's cork, so in theory, the holes won't make a huge difference, but I didn't pin it. I laid them on and spaced them out exactly where I wanted them, and then I marked them with a blue Choco pen just around the corners. You're going to stitch over that. You'll obviously, with a blue Choco, you could erase it, but you'll be able to, you're going to stitch over top of it anyway. But I marked the corners opposite of where I wanted those to be. And that way I could just hold them in place while I stitched them, and I didn't have to worry about pinning them in place. The other option that I've done with cork before is put a magnet. Do I have? I don't think I have magnets here. I put a magnet on the top and a magnet on the bottom, just those little super strong magnets that we use, and that will hold it in place while you stitch it on. But I found that marking it works the best. Okay, so don't pin your cork. It may leave large holes. Okay, that is everything that I think that you need to know for getting this one ready to applique. The other things that we are going to talk about with this one are how to put the green boucle yarn down, and then this stitch, which is called a raised cross stitch flower, and this stitch, which is called a lock stitch. So first, let's talk about how to attach this green, and then we'll go on to the stitches. Let me find a wool that will show up in our pictures, and I'm going to zoom in a bit, and I'm going to work right over here. Okay, this is the boucle yarn, and you can either start, because it has all the bumps, it does not go back and forth through your wool very easily, and if it does, you need a really thick needle to hold it. But all we need to tack it down is any thread. You could tack it down. I probably would go ahead and use a green in wool that matches that boucle yarn as much as you can. And then it really is just a matter of looping it where we want to cover. So I'm going to go ahead and twist this in a loop, kind of like this. Now you'll notice that my loop, I'm not so worried about my loop overlapping, okay? So I'm going to go in and just tack that down in a few places. I specifically chose one that will show, I hope, so that you can see it, because that'll help you see about how far apart I'm doing the tacking. And again, if you're doing this with green wool thread, then you won't have to worry about where it's showing. You probably could do bigger tacks. And then once I've sort of filled in that area, I can do like a figure 8, head to a new area. You won't, because you're doing it on top of green wool, you don't have to worry about whether it's going to have like full coverage, because you're just going to be, there we go. Most times I did at least 2 loops around each time. Not the same size loops, but at least 2 loops before I tacked it down. And because of all those little lumps that are part of the nature of the boucle yarn, there we go, loop, loop, loop. There's 3 loops. I'm going to tack that one down right over here. And I'm probably going to tack that one down. Where does it end? Right over there. Okay. Right over here. Because you've got the green wool behind it, you don't have to worry about your, in this case, I would have off-white showing through, but I wanted to do it this way so that you could see. Okay, I want that one to go a little closer over there. Make 2 or 3 loops. And then tack them down. Your tacks, whoops, may be longer, but because they are with the green wool thread, you won't be able to see them in this yarn. You can see mine, but you won't be able to see yours in the yarn. So just tack it down and move on to the next space, and leave some of your, well, let me see if I can turn this a direction that you can see it. Can you see the 3D-ness to it? That it sticks up. Those little circles, I try not to tack those down at all, because I want it to leave it rough and looking like a bush like this, okay? So that is how I would tack down the boucle yarn. You have, I believe, 5 yards of it, which as you can see is plenty, because I only used a little bit to be able to do this, maybe 9 inches. So you will have plenty to go ahead and cover it. But kind of keep that in mind. If it were me, I would probably cut 3 yards and 2 yards, because that would make sure that I was not going to run out in the middle. Okay, so that's the boucle. Then other things. This is a lock stitch. We're going to do that. To get these shutter lines correct, I used my handy dandy here we go. I used my on the line, and then I was just able to go, and that told me exactly where to stitch these down to make them even. I used the on the line to do a lot of things on this. Same thing with getting the lines that are part of the lock stitch on here even. I also used the, you can see that I lined those up to mark those. I used it a lot on this quilt. So that's how I marked up to do these. These are straight stitches here, but the edge ones are back stitches that I have then whipped. Remember, to whip a back stitch, you start off to the side of the back stitch, and then you just go over and under every stitch as you go. And when you pull it snug, it will give you a solid line. It's not as thick as a line that is stem stitched, but it's the next best thing to a back stitch where they don't quite touch. And it looks like I've stem stitched around the outside of there as well. Let me slide it up just a little bit, because I want to make sure you can see how to embellish the bottom of these pots. Okay, right here, this one is a stem stitch. Refer to our stitch dictionary, all of the tutorials that we have, but I'll go over ones that are new on this in this as I go. So that's a stem stitch, that's a stem stitch, and it's a stem stitch around the outside. And then I just did a zigzag chain stitch on this, just to give it a little bit of personality in between. And there's a good chance, if you want to make sure that those turn out the same kind of length of each of them, then just go ahead and mark dot, 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 and then you'll know exactly where you're headed to do those chains. I really like how I can even things up with this. Okay, so we need to do the raised cross stitch flower, and we need to do the lock stitch. Okay, let's begin with the lock stitch next. This is the lock stitch right here. I've done it in each of the directions, and it doesn't go into corners. It kind of has to be a square stitch. So because of that, I did all the way across the top, all the way across the bottom, and then I did in between. I was thinking as I planned this, I went, I've used the lock stitch somewhere on something not straight. And while that is true, I did do the lock stitch and kind of give it a curve right here. I don't know how it would work. I've never really done it into corners. I'm not sure it would work very neatly into corners. So let's go ahead. I'm going to be using on this one a big needle and some of the finer yarn that we have, because I want you to be able to see it really well. Okay, so a lock stitch, let me get perspective here on how much you can see. So you can see from right there to right there. Okay, so a lock stitch needs to be done on a background of straight lines. So I'm going to go ahead and draw some straight lines in right here. Let me make sure that I'm where you can see. Yes, I am. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and draw the straight lines on my wool. Let's do 5 of them. And then we'll put them in place before we start. So that would be the first thing. So when I was doing it on this guy, I showed you that I used my template here to mark the spots so they would be even. So I just did a straight line all the way along here like this, and that way I knew that they would be even. The exception to that is when I was squeezing this in, if it didn't quite fit, I just kind of made these either a little bit too long or a little bit too short to make it fit. Okay, let's move that back out of the way. Make sure that we are in the right spot for you to see it. Okay, when I am stitching the foundation for this lock stitch, I always go the same direction. I don't go from left to right and then turn around and go back. You know, come right back out right here and go back. And the reason for that is because they tend to pull funny that way. And your lock stitch is going to look best if it's evenly straight. So I make sure when I'm doing, if I'm doing needle weave bars, I don't go back. I always go the same direction because it'll give you lines that are more straight. Okay, so you're going to want to put the lines in place on your frame. And then this stitch always takes me just a minute to figure out which way I'm going. And I start in the center of the space. So let me see if I can explain what that means. Let's make sure these are pulled snug all the way to the edge, but you don't want them to pucker your wool that's underneath. Where's my little guy with the pumpkin? Here he is. Okay, because I'm never quite sure where the edges are going to end up and how snug I'm going to be able to make it, I start in the middle and do the lock stitch, and I work towards one edge and then I turn around and work towards the other edge. Okay, so when the lock stitch starts, it starts on, whoops, don't pull it out of the screen. All right, can we see it? Yeah, I did pull that one too tight. Let's pull it back in place. Okay. I didn't choose black, but I did want to choose high contrast. Okay, to start this lock stitch, we are going to start right on the far side of where it begins because we need it to cross over. Each of these stitches, if you examine them closely, each of these cross over the lines. So you can't see your little foundation lines here. They hide that. And so that will help you remember that you have to start on the outside. And once you come out of the background, we don't go back down to the background again until we get to the other end. I want this one to cross this one and come back. So I'm going to go ahead and cross that one and come back. The only problem with using this fatter yarn is that because it's a little bit looser. Okay, so this time, my first stitch is on the left, my second stitch is to the right of that one. We're going to alternate. So if this stitch is on the left, this stitch is on the right. That means that when I go back under this one again, I have to go on the left again because I want my next stitch to be lined up on the left. And they alternate like that. Left, right, left, right. So you do 2 that stick together, and then there's a gap where the next 2 are, and then 2 that stick together, and then a gap, and 2 that stick together and a gap. But if you'll just remember, one's got to go left. Now the next one I want to go right, so I'll make sure I go back through under on the right side of that stitch. I want you to lay right here where you're supposed to, so I don't pull you too tight. Okay, and then the last one at the end, you don't need to go under it. We're just going to go back down through our fabric. Okay, so I'm going to make sure it's the right length and it's in the right place. So that one is going to go through at about right there. Now, as far as how close these end up, I like to pack them in as close as I can, but you don't have to pack them in that closely. All right, let's get that out where it goes. All right, let's do the next one. So I want the next one to be right next to this one. I want them to be buddies. So I'm going to come out on this side of this. Okay, now these two are going to be buddies. So now this is going to stay on this side, but I want my next stitch to be away from this one. These two are buddies, these two aren't. These two are buddies, these two aren't. You have to go back. Go back where you came. That's the, yes, back where you came. But on this side, and that will make those two sit next to each other, and see how these two are next to each other and these two are further apart. Now this time, going back where I came, I want it to be a buddy. So I'm going to go through on that side. And that will make this one far apart and this one a buddy. Now I want them to be further apart, so I go, remember, back the way you came. Now those two are buddies, but the next one is set to be apart. So now we'll go back to the back side, and then we just alternate. This one was far apart this time, so the next time I go through, it's supposed to be his buddy. So I'm going to come out right next to him. And when I said I fit as many as I can in, that means I keep going all the way to the edge. Let me see if it's easier to see on here. I stuck as many of those in as I could before I ran out of space on these. Same thing on the project that you're working on. Okay, remember we have to go back the way we came, but these are buddies, so the next one needs to be to the outside. So I got to go back the way I came to the outside. Don't let them cross over like that. Lay down where you're supposed to. You're not going under, so it's just where it chooses to lay. Okay, my next one is going to go under, but I want it to be close. So I've got to come through to that side. The next one, I want it to come out on the outside, so I'll go to the outside. Okay, so now to finish this lock stitch, I would probably do one more along this edge, and then I go back to where I started in the beginning and work the opposite direction. That one is pulled, this one is pulled tighter than its neighbor because I pulled that guy too tight. Let's see, just wiggle it till you get it back to the right tension. When you're working it, you'll be working smaller sections and you won't have to worry about that tension as much, and you'll be working on a thicker surface. So I would do one more down this edge, and then I'll end up doing, like that was my first one and it was kind of in the middle, and I went 1, 2, 3. So I'll do 3 on this side, and it gives you that, it's called the lock stitch, but to me, it kind of creates little boxes. And the longer it is, let's pull this guy over so you can see him again. The longer they are, the more they're like rectangles rather than like little boxes. So if your lines are further apart, then you're going to get longer sets like this. But to me, it is one of the textures that I like for wood, so I use it in places that are wood. Okay, so that is the lock stitch, and you can see that last one that I did goes down out there, in here, out there, in here, back and forth like that. It looks like I did 1, 2, wait. 1 is that one, 2 is that one, 3 is that one, 4 is that one, 5. It looks like I did my center one and then 2 on each side. Okay, that is the lock stitch. Okay, so this is a raised cross stitch circle or raised cross stitch flower stitch, or just a raised cross stitch. That's because of the foundation for it. It is essentially, this is one that's done not with the chenille thread, so you can see a little bit more about what's going on with it. It doesn't end up being a circle because it's got the 4 spokes. It ends up being a square. It is kind of the opposite or upside down version of a whipped woven circle. So the whipped woven circle is the one that you go under and around that spoke, and under and around the next spoke, and under and around the next spoke. And in this one, instead of going under, we're going to go over and around the next spoke, over and around the next spoke. And so that under and around is how it's the stitches that look like this. It's how we create it's the stitch that we typically use with our Yorkshire button looms to make the Yorkshire buttons. And so the back side of it, which in this case has lots of extra threads, this texture right here where you see these lines, that's really this texture, the back side. What we don't see is the fact that it went around all of those spokes. If I could turn it inside out, you'd see that it went around all of those. So hopefully that foundation can help you understand what you're doing when you do this stitch. And I'm also hoping that I have enough thread on my needle to do one. Okay, so it starts with a cross stitch. So all of these have started with a cross stitch. And my tip on that would be, don't do all of them in line with the quilt, or you'll end up with what looks more like diamonds. Tilt them. See how this one's tilted just a little bit? I didn't that one and I didn't that one. I probably did these three and then went, oh, I need to tilt them or they're going to look funny. So we're going to try this one tilted just a little bit. So you start with a cross stitch. Let me make sure that I'm in the spot where you can see me. Okay. Yep, right there. Okay. Start with a cross stitch and then you come out right near the center. Okay. You're going to come out just above one of the spokes. And in this case, I'm using the 3 o'clock spoke that I'm coming out just above. Okay. We're going to start right here. We're going to go under that spoke. We lay it where we want, but we have to go under that spoke back the way we came. And that will leave us with that twist around there. Now lay it over the next spoke and we're working our way clockwise around. Lay it over the next spoke and go back the way you came. Now this first one is a little bit tricky to get it to lay where you want, but just make sure that it's laying out here a little ways. Okay, then do the same thing. Lay it over the next spoke and go back the way you came. We're headed, as we go around, we're going to be headed around clockwise. Lay it over the next spoke, the 12 o'clock, but back the way you came with your needle. Lay it over spoke at 3 o'clock, back the way you came. Lay it over spoke at 6 o'clock, back the way you came. And each time you're going to have these little lines that will lay just like this, and you want to keep them on the outside of each other. Lay it over 9 o'clock, back the way you came. Lay it over 12 o'clock, back the way you came. Lay it over 3 o'clock, back the way you came. Lay it over 6 o'clock, back the way you came. Under, come on. That leg is a little bit too short. So how do you know when you're done with these? It's when you get to the edge of this end of the spokes, so the spokes aren't poking out. So you can barely see my spokes here, but I did not do even spokes and I didn't start with a cross stitch that I knew where it was going. So I've got a really long spoke up here and a really short one down there. Lay it over the 9 o'clock, back the way you came. Lay it over the 12 o'clock, back the way you came. When you're finished, when you've run out of thread, when you've filled all your spokes, just go down on the far side of the last spoke. Just like that. That is a raised cross stitch flower, raised cross stitch circle, the upside down version of a whipped woven circle with an even number of spokes. If you wanted to do 5 spokes and do it, you could. You wouldn't start with a cross stitch, you just start with 5 spokes, but that's what it is. Just go lay it down over the next spoke, going clockwise, and then take your thread back the way you came. Lay it over the next spoke, thread back the way you came. And that's how these flowers are made. The fact that they are made with a chenille kind of gives them a little bit more personality in there and a little bit looseness, so they don't end up looking just like direct squares. Okay, I think that is everything that you need to know to get this block together. You can watch for notices about our stitch and chats or our getting together for stitching. We don't do that in person because we're scattered all over the US. We do that via Zoom. But if you watch for that, you're welcome to bring a project. You can ask questions during that time. It's a little bit like office hours in that I'm sitting here being able to answer your questions and we can visit with friends. So we will see you then.